Hey guys, how are you all doing out there? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we are finally going to dive into some Nintendo Direct predictions. At this point, the topic here is no secret. We all know that E3 this year has been canceled, and in the wake of E3 being canceled, we've seen a lot of companies, Capcom and Square and Microsoft and Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest, kind of step in and have their own presentations, which have been independent from E3, and actually kind of give us some big announcements and presentations, all digital shows, trying to hype us up and make us aware of some of their biggest games coming up for the next year. Typically, we would also see Nintendo have an E3 Nintendo Direct, like last year's fantastic Direct that revealed Metroid Dread to the world. But we've yet to hear confirmation about that, and through that there's been tons of conversation and speculation about what Nintendo is going to do, when they're going to do it, if they're going to do it, or maybe if they're not going to do it. All sorts of stuff. And so I've yet to make an official predictions video. What I've decided to do today is something different and actually feature your predictions and kind of discuss my thoughts on them. Basically, I asked you guys on Twitter to share a bunch of your predictions about the Nintendo Direct, when you think it might happen, what kind of games or updates might we see, what kind of new surprise announcements could be there, all sorts of fun stuff. And so it was really fun to get these answers and responses from you guys, and so I wanted to talk about them today. Now, what's tricky about these predictions from you guys, and I realized this really quickly as responses started coming in, is that a couple of things are true. One, for the most part, a lot of people said pretty much the exact same thing. You know, there are some big main ideas in game franchises that if you were going to just blanket predict for the Nintendo Direct, everyone's going to say the same thing. So there was a lot of repeated ideas and repeated announcements throughout everything. The other thing is a lot of people didn't just give one or two big predictions. You guys were listing out the entire Nintendo Direct you thought you could predict. Every game, every update, every surprise, every trailer, every possible thing. Several people just had like 20 bullet points in their tweet responses. So I tried to avoid too many of those because it just seemed like too much. I just wanted some more focused predictions, and you guys just came through with entire predictions of the whole show. So I just picked a few tweets and a few responses to choose from, so a lot of you guys will not see your response here. I tried my best to get a variety to give me something fun to talk about. If you want to be a part of these conversations and responses and interactions in the future, I recommend you not only subscribe to my YouTube channel, but you should also follow me on Twitter because I'm very active and I put these kinds of callouts for responses pretty often, and there's always a great chance that your response gets featured in a video and I get to give you kind of a shout out. So it's a lot of fun. Everyone seems to like it. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into your predictions. First prediction comes from this guy at STwitcher84, who predicts Astral Chain sequel, Breath of the Wild sequel, Mario Odyssey sequel. One more thing, GoldenEye 64 releases today on Nintendo Switch Online. So I think the GoldenEye thing, we're going to come back to that later, but I think that you're trying to say it would be a shadow drop of the same day that Nintendo's Summer Direct might actually happen. I think that that's actually a pretty good prediction if they go that route, but I don't want to focus too much on the GoldenEye thing. Everything else you say, you're really focused on sequels, right? We're going to get an Astral Chain 2, Breath of the Wild 2 update. We already know that game is being made, and a potential announcement of a Mario Odyssey 2. And here's the thing, sequels to known franchises are common from every franchise, from every company, from every Nintendo Direct. There's always a chance of a new Pikmin game or a new Metroid game or a new Donkey Kong game, right? Stuff we're probably going to talk about. So I think that when we look at the Astral Chain sequel, I will say that I do think we will get a sequel to Astral Chain. I don't know if it's what we would see in the very next Nintendo Direct. I think that there's too much to talk about in terms of like Breath of the Wild 2 and Splatoon 3 and Xenoblade 3. Bayonetta 3 being the big focus sequel from the same studio, Platinum, already coming to the Switch. I feel like they might be jumping the gun if they were to announce Astral Chain 2 before releasing Bayonetta 3, right? It's not impossible, but I don't know that I'm 100% ready to believe that it's going to show up in this next Summer Direct if we get one. But I would love to be wrong, and I would love to see it because Astral Chain is a great game, and I would love to see a sequel. So I guess we'll see. Next prediction comes from Seth Majka at Seth Maj on Twitter. I hope I pronounced your last name right, and I apologize if I didn't. And Seth says, no idea on the date. I like the element of surprise from Nintendo. I hope we see a new mainline Fire Emblem and another free update for Metroid Dread. I have a feeling we won't see Zelda yet, though. Too early. Good predictions here. I kind of like where you're going. I don't know that I agree with it all, but I like where you're going with your thoughts. No idea on the date. That's interesting because part of this whole predictions concept is when will we actually see it? And it's worth noting that this prior week, there were people trying to tell us that specifically on June 15th, we would actually see the E3 or the Summer Direct. Obviously, that didn't happen. And then the big story that's going around right now is Alana Pierce, who a lot of you guys might know from the industry. She has like randomly said that she thinks or has heard that the next Direct will happen on June 29th, at the very, very end of the month, about 2 weeks from now. I myself have really not heard a lot of anything behind the scenes, so I don't have any sort of updates or thoughts on that. I don't really know how much we could trust Alana Pierce to know because she now works for Sony and she used to work for IGN. So it's not impossible that she's heard something, but I just don't know. And if she had, I don't know that she'd want to be the one to put it out there and get everyone thinking, but I don't know. I can't say anything, and I don't know Alana, so tough to say. June 29th makes sense to me. I've started to believe that the end of the month might be the time that we would see it anyway, so sure, June 29th, why not? So Seth doesn't have a date prediction. He likes being surprised, and I definitely respect that. Nintendo surprises are part of what makes them interesting. So the Fire Emblem thing is interesting because there has been some rumors and some potential leaks or screenshots of the next Fire Emblem game. I don't really know how much we can believe those. The way the screenshots looked, they don't really look like a console Fire Emblem game, so I'm worried that if they're real, it might actually be something that's more mobile than it is Switch. But tough to say. I do think the next Fire Emblem game is in the works, though. Three Heroes, the new Fire Emblem Warriors game, is releasing at the end of the month, so maybe they'd want to go right from the release of the Warriors game into an announcement of the next Fire Emblem game. I would love to see it. I'm not going to touch on the Metroid thing yet because I think we're coming back to that in another prediction. But as far as Zelda goes, this is the interesting thing, man. Are we going to see Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 specifically talked about at this Summer Direct? I think you could go either way with those thoughts. Me, personally, I'm going to throw caution to the wind and say yes. I think that they will address Breath of the Wild 2. Now, other Zelda information for other Zelda games obviously has a great chance at showing up as well. But we want to know about Breath of the Wild 2. It was delayed to spring next year. Will they give us a big blowout in their Summer Direct and give us a title and more gameplay and more story ideas? It's 50-50, but I'm going to err on the side of yes. I feel like they can't miss this opportunity during a Summer Direct, so hopefully we see them do that. Next prediction comes from Justin Smith Williams at J Smith Williams, who says, I'm expecting a good show on June 29th, where we'll see our first look at Metroid Prime 4, followed by the Prime 1 remaster or remake announcement. A legacy IP will make a return. Golden Sun Donkey Kong will finally get a new game. GoldenEye and more rare games on Nintendo Switch Online, including Jet Force Gemini. So this is a good example of somebody who's just trying to predict every huge announcement happening all in the same show. And I understand the kind of the feeling or the necessity to want to do that, because whenever we think about a Nintendo Direct, all we think of is the 10 huge things we want to see happen eventually, and we assume they would all happen in one show. But that's not usually how Directs play out if you think about it, guys. It's hard to predict 5 to 10 Megaton announcements in one Direct because we usually only get 1 or maybe 2 huge announcements in a Nintendo Direct. Everything else are small tier announcements or updates on games that we already know exist, right? Nintendo Directs isn't just a machine gun blast of like huge game, huge game, huge game, huge game. It's a bunch of small things, updates on current games, and then a big reveal, then more regular small announcements and updates, and then probably ending on another big reveal. That's what usually happens, but every time there's a new Direct, people think that it's nothing but huge announcements, and that's not really true. So to me, this is kind of falling in that territory. A new Golden Sun and a new Donkey Kong and a Metroid Prime 4 trailer and a Metroid Prime Trilogy remaster and a bunch of rare games coming to Nintendo Switch Online. It just seems like a lot to have. Oh, and a new legacy IP like the return of Punch-Out or Pikmin or something. That's a lot to put in one show. Now, I think that all of these have a chance at happening in the show, but I don't think that they all have a chance at happening in the same show. I think one or two of these might happen. So, a legacy IP making a return, yes, I think there's a great chance. You know me, I'm always thinking Pikmin 4 is around the corner. I want to think that Pikmin 4 has a chance at showing up at the show. I think Donkey Kong could also be that legacy IP, though. So, Pikmin 4 or a new Donkey Kong, these are kind of interchangeable to me. I think one of those has a great shot at happening at this next Nintendo Direct. Now, the Metroid thing is a huge one, so I want to talk about that. I do think Metroid's going to be at this Nintendo Direct, you guys. I really do. Before Metroid Dread was announced, I had heard that a new 2D Metroid game was coming. It was from somewhere and some person that I believed. I didn't know it was Dread, and I didn't know it was going to be at E3, but I was already kind of aware of a very likely new 2D Metroid being made. So that showing up last year kind of fell in line with some of that stuff. When we look at what's happening with Metroid this year, I haven't really heard anything. I've heard a lot of the same things you guys have, that has been public rumors about a trilogy or a potential Metroid Prime 1 remake. I tend to believe those things, but I can't say anything for sure on those. I do, however, think, if I was to just predict as a fan, I think that if we get a Summer Direct, Metroid's going to be a part of it. And I do think there's a chance that Prime 4 is going to show up. We're beyond 6 months from the release of Metroid Dread. We know that Nintendo cares about Metroid again. They're going to start to really pump Metroid Prime 4 in the near future. Why not give us that first glimpse at E3 or Summer Direct? I think there's a great chance that happens. Would they do Prime 4 and the Trilogy Remaster in the same show? Maybe. It seems like a lot of Metroid for one show, and I think Nintendo's still a little bit gun-shy on Metroid. But there's a small part of me that thinks it's possible. So, all I will say is, big picture, if we get a Summer Direct in June, I think we're getting Metroid in some shape or form. More than likely, it's going to be the Prime 1 remake or the Prime Trilogy Remaster. But I think there's a shot at Metroid Prime 4 as well, so time will tell. Next prediction comes from Reckless at Reckless Ridley, who says, my conservative and bad predictions: air date August 3rd. New trailers: Bayonetta 3, Breath of the Wild 2, Splatoon 3. Game updates: Advance Wars update, Breath of the Wild 2 update, Bayonetta 3 date revealed, surprise announcements, GoldenEye coming to Switch, more N64 games, new Donkey Kong Country games. So, I really like this because I really like the way you laid this out. It was very, very formatted, very easy to read and understand, and so that part I like. This is another example of how we're starting to see a lot of people predicting a lot of the same things, right? Because I think a lot of us have the same ideas about what we might see at the show. So I find this prediction interesting because you predict August 3rd. So I think you're making a huge, big bet on something different than what everyone else thinks, and I respect that. Everyone else is believing the June 29th thing, and I think that that's possible. But you're saying it's not happening in June. You're skipping July altogether and going right to August. So you think Nintendo is going to really make us wait for the next Direct. I don't agree with that, but I respect the bold decision on that prediction. So we'll see if you turn out to be right on that one. As far as what might show up in the next Direct, you're predicting Bayonetta 3, Breath of the Wild 2, Splatoon 3. Safe bets. I think all three of those have a fantastic chance at showing up at the next Nintendo Direct. What information we're going to get about those, tough to say, but it all makes sense to me. And I do think a Bayonetta 3 date will be in the next Nintendo Direct, and along with that, a new trailer with some new gameplay. So that's very likely. More talk about 64 games coming to Switch Online. More talk about a new Donkey Kong game. Obviously, those are all very likely as well. We just got confirmation on Pokemon Snap coming to Switch Online. N64, you know, more talk about GoldenEye. The big thing here is an update on the Advance Wars situation. I think there's a chance that we see that. We know Advance Wars was supposed to come out in April, but because of the situation happening with Russia and Ukraine, Nintendo decided to delay that game. And so now we know they're just sitting on it. I think that, yeah, they're probably going to give us an update and probably a release date on that game in the next Nintendo Direct, whenever it happens, whether it's in June or, like you predict, in August. So here is a big bullet point prediction from Doominal Crossing, who's a good follower and has some YouTube content that's pretty solid as well. And this is what they say. I mean, you can honestly, I'm not even going to read it. You can see what they say. It's just a bunch of bullet points. This is the one huge bullet point tweet that I wanted to pull because Doominal Crossing is a great follower of the channel, and I really appreciate you for that. So, you know, Prime Remaster, Prime 4 preview. You say no gameplay. I don't think that will happen. I mean, similar to Breath of the Wild 2 reveal, I guess I see what you're saying. You know, maybe they would do something like that, where it's more, not so much cinematics, but cinematic moments that kind of shows what Samus looks like in some of the graphic engines. So maybe they might do that instead of gameplay. So here, you know, the Metroid Dread update number 3. This is important to me to talk about because I don't quite know what's going to happen here. You call it Dread update number 3 because I actually would see it as update number 2. Because they gave us the initial update, which was one update, but they did spread out when the updates happened. So that was all part of the same announcement, but that announcement released in 2 different segments. So whether you call it free update 2 or 3, I guess it doesn't matter. You think another free update might come. I don't know that I think another free update to Dread would come, and I kind of hope they don't do that because, as many of you may know, I didn't love the initial free update because it just, even as a Metroid fan, it didn't get me excited. I would rather have announcement of paid DLC that is all new content and a new zone or area to play with new additional story and some context to what maybe happens after the end of Dread. Release 5 hours worth of gameplay in a new area to play for $15. I'm going to buy it, and I think most of you guys are going to buy it as well. So we'll see if they talk about Dread. I think they would instead go towards Prime 4 and Prime Remaster. That's my thought. Somebody who mentions here the next booster course update for Mario Kart 8. I absolutely think that will be in the next Direct. So I agree with you on that one. Strikers update, maybe, maybe not. You know, you talk about Breath of the Wild 2 stuff, Bayonetta 3, Xenoblade 3. You also mentioned, the first here to mention Wind Waker or Twilight Princess HD. I'm 50-50 on if that's going to happen at the next Direct. I'm kind of 50-50 on if it's going to happen at all. But if we assume Nintendo will release something Zelda this year to stick to the annual releases, it definitely makes sense. So I guess maybe there is a chance. The last thing I want to mention is you talk about the Batman Arkham Collection. That's been discussed for a while. And yeah, I think that has a great chance of happening as well. I think people want it. I think that is coming to the Switch. So why wouldn't that be one of the small announcements, maybe like in a sizzle reel, that they show in the Nintendo Direct? We know Directs tend to have sizzle reels of third-party announcements, and I think that, yeah, they're probably going to confirm it in just a quick blurb in a sizzle reel. Closing in on the end here, next one comes from the Dark Void at AlphaNate7, who says the 28th or the 29th for the air date. New trailers for Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel, maybe that rumored Metroid Prime remake, new surprises from third-party partners, surprise announcement, you say, or conspiracy theory. I like this. One conspiracy theory, Nintendo partners with Google to get Stadia on Nintendo Switch Online. Second is Nintendo announces their next-gen system. So I'm going to skip all the first part because we've already touched on those as far as games go. Your conspiracy theories I find interesting because one I believe, the other one I don't believe. The one I don't believe is Google Stadia. If this was maybe closer to the beginning of the launch of Stadia, I might think that there's a chance Stadia comes to Nintendo platforms. But Stadia is basically dead. I know some games are still getting released and including Stadia. Like I think Resident Evil 4 was just, the remake was just announced for Stadia and stuff like that. But we know that Google has all but given up on Stadia. It was a failure. I don't think that expanding it to a new platform has any value for anyone involved. It sure doesn't have value to Nintendo. And so I just don't see how or why Google could even convince Nintendo to do that, or why Google would spend the money to do it when Stadia is basically already a failure. And I'm not making a call. If you like Stadia, that's fine. I'm not trying to say it's good or bad or whatever. I'm just trying to say I don't really think that there's any reason to think that could happen. Now, the one I sort of believe is obviously Nintendo announcing their next-gen system. Because you guys know me, I absolutely think Nintendo is on the cusp of revealing or confirming their next-generation hardware. I don't think that that's going to happen at the next Nintendo Direct, though. It might happen right before the end of the year, and I also think it would happen separate from a Direct. I think they might do a trailer or a presentation the way they revealed the Switch, or the way they even revealed like the Switch Lite, for example, with a 7-minute video and presentation from Koizumi talking about the Switch Lite. I think they would do something similar to that. Either a 3-minute trailer or a 10-minute little mini presentation that talks about and confirms their next generation hardware. That will probably happen next year, but if it did happen this year, I think it's happening separate from a Nintendo Direct, and I think it would happen more at the end of the year. Now, the last prediction, I want to give a shout out to a good personal friend of mine who's actually a close friend of my younger brother. We live far apart, but I know him very well and hung out with him several times. My good buddy, Evan Swafford. And Evan here predicts something that we've already talked about a little bit, and I want to go more in depth on his response. His prediction is the GoldenEye HD game coming to Switch and Xbox in August. So a couple of specific predictions here from Evan. So here's my thinking. Evan specifically calls it the GoldenEye HD game. I don't think that if we're talking about the older HD game that was a remade HD reimagining of the original Pierce Brosnan GoldenEye game from like 2009 or 10 for the Xbox 360. If we're talking about that, I think if that game gets re-released or released, I think that's going to only come to Xbox, which I am completely fine with, and I will buy and play and love it on the Xbox. But what I do think is that GoldenEye could come to the N64 Switch online service, but I don't think it's going to be the HD reimagining from 2010. I think it would just be the N64 base GoldenEye game, but in HD, the way all of the current 64 games are playable on the Switch Online. So I think we'd get two things if there's any truth to this. One, HD remaster from 2010, that would be Xbox exclusive. GoldenEye 64 with an HD polish coming to Switch Online. I think those two things could happen together, but I think that they're coming to two different platforms. So Evan, I think you're mostly onto something here. And so that's it. You know, fun to talk about some of these predictions and respond to what you guys have to say. Again, I got a ton of responses, but there was so much repetition between them that I just selected a few. So if I didn't get a chance to read and react to your prediction, then maybe look out for next time. Again, you know, subscribe to the YouTube channel here. Definitely follow me on Twitter. I'm very active, and you might get a chance at being discussed sometime in a future video like this. So fun times. Now we just play the waiting game. When is Nintendo going to announce and show us their next Direct? I hope it's sometime soon. I hope to see Metroid and Zelda and all that fun stuff there. So that is all today. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will see you next time on another video. Bye-bye.